It was an interesting script, an interesting premise of trying to put the sort of X-generation spirits into the sort of secret agent espionage world.
It was a very interesting take on an existing genre, giving it quite an edge.
A script with a lot of action, a lot of gadgets, a lot of things happening, very demanding.
Once this starts going, it just gets faster and faster. It never lets up.
The look and style of the film was based on the premise of the script about trying to work in the world of extreme sports and X generation and sort of very sort of hip, high-tech design in both sort of costume and gadgets and the sets into this world of what you understand as a secret agent world, which is usually a little bit stuffier.
It's an action movie. It's got to have an edge. It's got to be something modern and something that's going to have devices that are exciting, that are maybe not completely realistic, but are something that are maybe a little beyond realistic.
There's a lot of discussions about whether we would be contemporary or sort of just out of contemporary or futuristic. I think the conclusion was that we didn't really want to be science fiction. Everything really had to look as though it could be believable now.
Rob trusted Gavin quite a bit, and he wanted Gavin to give him a look that was, you know, going to push things a little bit, be a bit new, over the top, but at the same time beautiful.
When you get a guy like Gavin to create the environment, when he knocks it out of the park like he did, you've got to thank him, because all you have to do is be at that point and work off the environment that he's created.
OPSEC 3, yellow. OPSEC 4, orange. OPSEC 5, red.
In the style of the movie, we had a lot of contrast to work with. We knew we were working in LA, we were working in the sort of the street side life of LA. We were going to Prague, we were going to be using locations in Prague that were a mixture of very sort of elegant and romantic and very sort of run down and grimy, big palaces, small bars, sort of subterranean environments. So we had great contrast going on all over the place, and I think the one advantage we had, or the one thing we were trying to do with the NSA, was push it into a world of very modern high-tech design to contrast with all the environments we were going to see or build in Prague.
The NSA, however, which was a set we built in Prague, was a very high-end, high-tech, technical set with a lot of very specific finishes. And Gavin and Rob had no mercy there. They wanted it to look just as good as it could. It had almost 120 monitors in it and very high-end metal, steel finishes.
It sounds great, but it's like, yeah, we're gonna have 1 million monitors and we're gonna be underground. But it was exciting because it's a contrast, I think, to the Prague world. And I think that was, you know, that was important in the set, to give it this scale and the scope that it's, you know, this place has its pulse on every event in the world. It's the kind of place that can track a single person or track a whole army.
So it was quite hard work, but a great contrast for the look of the movie.
Georgi and his crew are new. They're young and they're new and they're powerful, and their style is the style of urban rebellion. The tattoos and the clothes and the clubs and the girls and the whole thing.
Georgi's castle as a concept started out in slightly different form in the script. It was originally a castle split in two sections. It was a castle or palace that he lived in the center of Prague, and it was a fortress that he had on the outside boundaries of Prague, sort of more in the countryside, in the mountains. Gradually, it just became sensible to put these two locations together. And there was a castle, a palace called Ranov that I'd seen previously on trips to Prague or to the Czech Republic on other shows that had never been shot in before. It gave us the palace, the sort of the big grand scale for Georgi, something he lives in this sort of mad opulence as an anarchist would. And underneath there was a belief that the Ahab launch room could be built in the cliff face underneath with the opening doors to the river.
Exterior of the castle was a fantastic location down in Moravia, and we added to it with various quite large pieces of scenery just to seal the courtyard off to make it into the area that Rob wanted the action to unfold in. It had to seem like an impregnable fort, and in fact it was a three-sided castle that looked out over a cliff, so we had to seal that fourth side off. So that was a fairly big element from a construction point of view.
Ahab was the sort of 30-foot long sort of submersible, and the idea was that this was being built in a subterranean environment underneath his palace. So we obviously weren't going to find that as a location, so we knew we were going to have to build this. The difficulty of working with water in this instance was obviously building the set in what was going to be a water environment, and there was no stage available in Prague that actually had a tank, as we would call it, like a waterproof tank below the stage floor. Luckily, the studio complex, which was an old industrial works that we were using, one of the stages there did have a sunken floor. So we started with a shell that was mainly a sort of period interior underground of sort of brick columns and brickwork, but then applied a lot of modern technology into it, as though Yorgi had turned it into a modern high-tech workshop. Ahab set was our largest set, and it was our most complicated effort, both as an art department as a construction department as well. The end section, the launch room, had a very large tank in it that was over 6 feet deep. And we had to build a metal tank within the existing tank, within the stage, because it was just basically a huge depression in the floor that wasn't watertight. So we had to build a metal tank within that. And there was huge collaboration with the special effects department, because the set was animated in various ways. There were huge doors that shut. There was an extraction system for taking gas out of the air when one of the rockets goes off inside the workshop. But it was probably the hardest in that it combined the basic set construction finishes of stone and brick with the high-tech metal, glass, and all the rest of it. And in fact, by the time the water was in the tank, it became very, very difficult to just get about the set. To get to certain areas of the set, you had to get in a boat and literally row over to it. But it was a great end result.
This is movie making to the highest degree.
The drug farm was one of the first sets that we could actually get our teeth into. It was scheduled early, it was in LA, we knew what we had to do. We had all the reference from the sort of Colombian, South American drug farms, which was obviously quite hard to get, but we had enough to work with. So we initially made up some little concept models to show to Rob little different ideas of how these buildings could be constructed, how big they were, what sort of designs were there, what would happen in each one in the real world of sort of drug farm. So we had the basis of a real drug farm layout, and then we built a big scale model, or a small scale model, but a big size 10-foot by 6-foot board that had the whole of the drug farm on it, which became our sort of talking point, really. It was almost like a Second World War operations room with all the commanders around looking at the model, explaining where the motorbike would fly, the helicopters would fly, and all those things would go on.
The drug farm was really designed for the stunts. I went with the stuntman, and my art director working with me, Bruce Hill, went around the whole drug farm and started labeling places where we'd have to have jumps, where we'd have to have fences, where we'd have to have obstacles. So it could become a very exciting sequence for Vin and the motorcycles and for Rob to choreograph. Rob sat down with a model, he looked at it all, and he said, you know, this building's first to blow, the helicopter comes around here. He just started playing with it, and in about an hour, he had sort of mapped it all out in his head.
God.
She's checking you out, man.
I think I'll hang on to these.
The script had a number of demands for weapons and gadgets for the sort of NSA and the Xander character, and also Yorgi's world as well. So there were a number of real weapons, from great big sort of rocket launchers down to sort of handguns that were real, practical film weapons. And then there was a series of gadgets and weapons and guns that we designed and made ourselves as props that obviously didn't function. And generally they were on the border of being real in terms of their design and what they could do. When these things appeared, they inherently looked naturally part of that world, even though if you took them away from that and looked at them, you probably might think a couple of them were a little bit on the more futuristic side.
We're taking things that people can recognise, I think, and taking them a step further into a new realm.
You didn't want to make it too high-tech. You didn't want them to be delicate. You're working with an actor who's a big man, You know, one of the big questions was the communicator. You don't want it to look like a toy. The weapons, you don't want them to look like toys. Everything has to be a little bit beefy. It was kind of a retro-futuristic look.
We started talking about the tone of the gadgets, because gadgets are very difficult to work out, and they take a long lead time to be built. The idea was I wanted to stay in the real world. I wanted to say, okay, it's the NSA, and they're capable of doing many things that are quite spectacular, but it's not the future. There's no laser guns, there's no this, there's no that. I want to do stuff that you could possibly believe happens, but it's got to be fun, because in some senses, this is a boy's own adventure, you know, and the boys' toys are part of what makes it, you know, the fantasy element of these movies work. So, you know, there is no secret agent movie without great secret agent weapons.
The gadgets were really, really, really cool. Cool gadgets.
The locations and the split of the production, in a funny sort of way, was one of the things that interested me in the first place. And I think the biggest problem we had in this instance was that we were definitely in two very specific places that were a long way away, LA and Prague. And in the short time we had to prep the movie and to shoot it, that time difference in travel was a huge thing. And so I suppose my biggest challenge in it was just trying to keep my head around two very different art departments that were operating in two different continents.
One of the challenges is probably the crew, to get your art department that is going to deliver for you. The Czech Republic's well off in that quite a lot of films have been made there now in the last 10 years, so the crew that you can find there are quite experienced. But on top of that, we did bring crew from the UK, and it was meshing them together so that they could work more homogeneously was very, very important.
If you're going to shoot a place up, like a beautiful old historical building, you can't just drill holes in all the walls. You have to provide things which can break and be damaged, and build walls over walls, or build new walls which can be damaged. It's hard in an action movie. It's something that, if you're going to be destroying a lot of square footage in the place you're going into, you have to really work around a place.
One of the challenges of the movie was the speed that we had to actually get things up and running. I think it was always intended that the film came out in the following summer from us starting in September, which basically was 10 months from start to finish, which is quite intense for...
Especially a movie that's got a lot of effects and a lot of locations and a lot of design. It had vehicles, it had communication devices, weapons, a lot of things that had to be fabricated. And it was going to be hard to make a lot of the deadlines, we were afraid, but you know, that's one of the things that makes it interesting.
Generally, it was like, so have an idea and run with it if it was a good idea, rather than mull it over for weeks and weeks. So quite an interesting creative process.
You can tell me whether or not it deserves a sequel. I think working on it, that we were all excited about it.
Well, I think despite the madness and intensity of the whole shoot and the whole preparation process, I hope we can all do it again one day.
The one thing I think that is important to XXx is that I had great fun on it, and roll on XXx too.